This episode is specific for the Toyota RAV4 EV. We're going to put back the drive unit in the car and put it back on its wheels, like you can see right here. And this episode is also an example of the law of conservation of misery, meaning that when you solve one problem, as a side effect, you get a new problem back, and hopefully the new problem is less bad compared to the original problem. We're going to follow the Toyota manual for assembly of the drive unit into the car, and it starts with mounting this motor mounting damper with 22 Newton meter or 16 foot-pound for 3 bolts M13. Next, the manual says to install this breather and this breather, but they're already there, and to install this pipe over here with 7.2 Newton meter or 64 inch-pound. Next, the manual says to install the so-called switch circuit assembly. It's the speed sensor, and it is metric 10, 5.5 Newton meter, which is 49 inch-pound. Next, the manual says to mount the wire harness clamp bracket. It's metric 10, 7.7 Newton meter, which is 68 inch-pound. Next, the manual says to mount the wiring harness protector, which is this thing. Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to do that after the motor is in, because that's easier, way easier. Otherwise, we won't be able to reach all these things when it's on top of the motor and underneath all this stuff that I don't want to get out. This applies only to the Toyota and the Benz. We're going to put the parking servo back in here with some Loctite 242 M13, 20 Newton meter, 3 bolts. Last thing before I mount the drive unit into the car is I put 1.3 liters of Dextron 6 in the gearbox, because it's much easier to do now than to do later. Next, we torqued it with 21 foot-pounds, both the fill and the drain, and this is a 8 millimeter. It's a bit of a hassle to get the drive unit back in, so those holes over there need to align. So you have to wiggle the drive unit into place a little bit. Simultaneously, you can align it with this bracket over here. It has to go in here, and then it has to align with this hole over here. So just take some trial and error to do that. Quick and dirty update. That hole is now aligned. How to do that? First, I mounted this whole thing over here, easy to align. Nice long pin over here, or bolt. Then I put this member back in with 2 bolts over here, 2 bolts on the other side. And also I mount it to the motor over there. And once that is in, meaning this one and this one, then the back one far away follows much easier. So I would recommend not doing that one first, instead doing it last, so the 3rd bolt to mount the motor. The back bolt needs to be torqued with 74 foot-pounds or 100 Newton meter. I had to use every extension I got, look at that. It's insane. Next, this nut, this bolt, and this bolt, all 3 of them 95 Newton meter or 70 foot-pounds, 70. Next, I torqued the bolts holding the motor. You can see it right here where I tap my finger. It's not so sharp. So that is 70 foot-pounds or 95 Newton meter. Next, the torque is for this one, and this one 70 foot-pounds or 95 Newton meter. And then for these bolts on this side and on the other side as well, that is 71 foot-pounds or 96 Newton meter. Also note that all these bolts here in the middle over there, the bolts for the motor brackets over there, they're all M17. Right, now we can remove the jack because the motor is supported sufficiently. Next, we install this beam over here and on the other side. The torque for the back bolts is 71 foot-pounds or 96 Newton meter, and the front two bolts is 73 foot-pounds or 99 Newton meter. Finally, we install the motor under brace sub-assembly with 6 bolts, 68 foot-pounds or 92 Newton meter. All M17 still, 2 here, 2 there, 2 at the back. And we see that we still have nice access to the drain. Next, I clicked in the speed sensor over here, and I plopped back the coolant hose and the clamp on exactly the same location. You know, look at the imprint and put it at the same location. So that's done. And I plopped it back into the bracket over here. It's a snap fit for both this one and both this one. Next, we're mounting the wiring harness protector. That's this one. 2 times socket 10mm, one there and one up there, with 7.7 Newton meter according to the manual, which is less than what I measured. And then there's 2 bolts at the back. It's difficult to see, but you can see one bolt over there, the upper one, and the one over there. 14 Newton meter, that's what I measured. And socket 13. Also make sure put a rag there. When you lose one of those bolts and they fall behind there, you never get it back. And also what I did, I just put a piece of tape so to hold the bolt in your socket and your tool, so you don't lose it. Next, we mount the front motor mounting bracket. 3 bolts, a socket 19mm, and the torque is 70 foot-pounds, 70 or 95 Newton meter. And you may need this joint, otherwise you won't be able to reach it. Next, we inserted the power cables and torqued it with 9 Newton meter, socket 13mm, and then we added the wire harness clamp bracket with socket 10mm, 7.7 Newton meter, there, and at the top there is a nut right there. Next, we clicked back in the parking brake connector, also clicked it in there. Then we added this bracket over here, 2.8 Newton meter, metric 5 Allen key. We plugged back logic connector, and also I forgot this grounding connector, 7.7 Newton meter, socket 10. Finally, here I put back the coolant hose. I zip tied it here to this bracket, and I put the coolant hose back there on the motor, and the clamp is in exactly the same position as where it was. Next, we're going to mount the drive shaft. Toyota manual says you have to buy a new snap ring, put the hole at the bottom and center it so that the ring is concentric with the shaft. For that purpose, you can put a lot of multi-purpose grease on there, MP grease, according to the manual. We also cleaned the splines. I cleaned this spline with the Dremel and some more tools. I also cleaned the inner spine over here because there was a lot of gunk in there. So now we're going to pop it in. Also, the manual says put the same grease on this surface over here. First drive shaft is in. It's easiest to do it laying below the car, and then the manual says to use a hammer and a brass tool to do it, but that's not necessary if you have centered the ring just by hand. You can just plop it in and then try to tug it back to see if it really snapped in there. Next, you can pull the axle through the hub and then make sure that the match marks align, so this thing over here should match with our black mark over there. Another way to check if the drive shaft is completely in is to see if the gap between the cast and the drive shaft is like 2mm, no more than that, because this one does not have the ring yet in, and I just dry fit it and I push it all the way in, then it's a gap of 2mm. So on this side I checked that, and that is the case, so that's good. Passenger side, I was a little bit too optimistic for this one. I needed to use the hammer, so I got a brass pipe. I hammered the end, put it against this face over here, and then with the hammer, steel block hammer, I could gently tap it into place. Next we mount the lower control arm, 68 foot-pounds for 1, 2, 3 times socket 17 millimeter. Next we mounted this one, 55 foot-pounds with a socket 17 and a 6 millimeter Allen key optionally. Next we mounted the speed sensor back, so 14 millimeter socket, 19 Newton meter, and plugged it back in here. And there is a metric 10 of socket 10 millimeter and 8.5 Newton meter torque on both sides of the car. Next, clean the internal external thread with solvent that completely evaporates, then torque it with 215 foot-pounds. For this we use the 30 millimeter 12-point socket. Next we have to stake the nut. Enough damage. Alright. Next I bolted back this boy over here, 5 bolts. Put the battery back. Bolt there, bolt there, bolt there, bolt there. Next we put back the surface plug grip. Now I have to bolt it up. Next we put coolant in all the way to the full level. Next the manual says to push the power button so that it is in ready mode. Do not drive yet, but wait 2 minutes, and then in those 2 minutes it's going to pump the coolant. Then repeat the procedure 3 times. So now we're waiting 2 minutes. Note that the wheels are still off, and I do not hear the pump do any pumping. Another trick I read on the forum is to just start charging the car, and then maybe the pump starts as well. So now it's charging somewhere between 50 and 100% state of charge. But I still do not hear a pump. I heard a relay switch. But that's it. This is emergency drain number 1, the hose. At the end I folded it in half, put a zip tie around it. There's also a hose on emergency drain number 2. Same story. So now we're going to put the cover back on. So I tried to put the car on the ground, so I put the wheels back on. Maybe that helps. I'm charging it. It says charging active and then stopped by system malfunction.